This one goes out to everyone like me who is addicted to sports simulation games, specifically out of the park baseball, and who gets a little depressed after the end of the World Series, not just seasonally, but because we're not going to have baseball for a few months, and if we're lucky, the hot stove will be lukewarm. It can be a tough going because you've probably played one or more seasons in out of the park baseball. You're getting a little bit bored and you're looking for something new. For me, a couple of years ago, in one of those cold Colorado COVID winters, I was just bored of OOTP after playing about 10 seasons in my sim, and I finally tried Football Manager, and it was very, very different than what I expected, because I knew that both were considered to be best-in-class examples of the genre. Like, I'd played or tried to play sports simulation games of hockey and basketball, and none of them really matched the heights of OOTP for me. And I knew Football Manager was almost universally regarded as the next best alternative, even if you didn't really like soccer. And that was me. I was the stereotypical American who didn't really understand the offside rule. I'd tune in to the final of every other World Cup. I didn't play it as a kid, so it just never I never had an attachment to it the way I did any of the traditional four major sports in North America. So it was very overwhelming to look at a player and see just how many attributes there are in comparison to OOTP. It was a lot. So I did a lot of research, watched a lot of videos, and wanted to boil down a few pieces of information that I didn't find in those. So there's a lot of great information out there already, but I want to pick out a few things that you may not have heard, or maybe a little more counterintuitive, but may be really helpful if you're coming from out of the park baseball. So the first thing I would recommend with this is to pick a good but not great team from a second division team. One of my first mistakes was choosing Liverpool because I have a friend who's a very big Liverpool fan, and I really enjoyed the Jurgen Klopp book by Rafa Honigstein. But Liverpool is so big and there's dozens of staff members, huge budgets. It was just too overwhelming to start with. So picking a team in the second tier, you have fewer options, you have less money, and you're trying to get promoted. So it's a very different experience, and I think one that is much more helpful in learning about the game. In my first year in FM21, I chose Nottingham Forest when they were still in the Championship, the second tier of England. Then in FM23, I chose St. Pauli, who are still in the SVI Bundesliga. I found that I was able to learn a lot more about what players are better than others, and really that's a key part of any game, but especially sports simulation games. I had to find out how to marginally improve my team in the second tier to go from mid-table expectation to top of the table finish. Once I got promoted, I had to figure out how to raise the level of the team and find better players in order to stay in the top division, and then likewise to progress up the table. And I think that was a much better way than starting with a top tier team in let's say like an RB Salzburg in Austria, where you have really high expectations. If you don't win, you are going to get fired, and you also don't get to fully appreciate the difference because you're just so much better than the rest of the league. You don't get to understand the nuance between a player who's good in a smaller domestic league versus what they're like in the Champions League or another continental competition. So I would stick to a second division club and try and improve them and get promoted. It's also very rewarding and helps you get more attached to the save. I would start there. Then once I picked a club, I would use a preset tactic. I would choose one of these, specifically one of these styles that has a thumbs up on it, and even with the formation, you get a pretty good guide there. This recommendation is based off of your club and your squad. The game doesn't really steer you all that wrong here. These are designed to work, let's say 68 to 95% of the time, just out of the box, and you don't really have to tweak much. This gives you an opportunity to start playing without having to learn the dozens of roles. You're better off learning that as you go than having to do that before you ever play a match. And over time, I would say within 10 to 20 matches, you start figuring out what your strengths and weaknesses are, both in the tactic and with your squad. Number 3, focus on learning what players are better than others and what a good player looks like in a given role. I talked a little bit about this in the first one, but I think this is probably the most difficult skill, specifically if you're coming from a game like OOTP. Because in baseball, you're just trying to score runs and prevent runs, right? It's a little bit different to find out what works in your style and system and knowing who is good there. Certain players are going to be really great in some systems and they are completely useless in other ones. I think in comparison, if you're familiar with other sports sims games dealing with draft pick rules and salary caps and what a soft salary cap looks like and the other minutia around collective bargaining agreements, if you can handle that, then dealing with the fees and salaries and registration rules, they're much simpler in almost every European league. My 4th suggestion is starting with the staff responsibilities. So on staff responsibilities, you can then drill down into specifics of what you want the AI to handle. And I would start with most of these set to be your staff. There are so many things, like you can manage your youth team and your B team, and you can set up individual training for dozens of players as far as what position they should learn and what attributes they should improve. And then you can do your team-wide training, and you can go on and on. That's just talking about training, much less recruitment and negotiating contracts, things like that. I would suggest that you start off with pretty much everything that isn't related to signing new players and match day management. You keep those. Everything else goes to the AI, because those are, I think, the 2 most rewarding initially, also 2 of the most crucial. Then start slowly integrating one new responsibility every year. So like what that looked like for me, the first season I played, I just signed players, negotiated their contracts, and did the tactics and match day management. After year 1, I started signing staff, coaches, figuring out who was the best medical team, all of that. Then after the second year, I started going over scouting assignments and determining which scouts should go to what areas and what kind of players to look for. Then year 3, I started working on training. It took probably 10 seasons, and it was really good because there are so many things, it can get so overwhelming. Hopefully you know yourself and your personality well enough to know where you fall on laissez-faire to micromanager spectrum. And I am a control freak, so I wanted that control. You can figure out what works best for you and tailor the game to the experience you want there. Then lastly, find what you enjoy and double down on that. Some people love the tactical complexity of figuring out why the Metzal on attack is better than the central mid on attack. They love switching between formations. That is what makes the game, so they focus on that. You might love hunting for wonder kids and finding the best prospects, the best youth players to become the next Ballon d'Or winner. I really enjoy taking these small to mid-sized clubs, building them up into financial powerhouses, and then taking all that money and finding the best and weirdest wonder kids. In my latest save, I dropped 50 million euros on an 18-year-old center back from Gibraltar playing professionally in England. He's probably never going to be more than a backup for me, but he's good enough to be a backup, and he's from Gibraltar. And it was not a Moneyball signing at all, but it sparked so much joy to have a player from such a weird location that does not create good players usually. So that's what I enjoy, is having that and being able to create my own internal best 11 from 11 different countries. There's so many things in here that you can find. It's, a really fun game. If you like OOTP and you like soccer at all, then you probably already are playing Football Manager, but if not, you'll really enjoy it. And if you're like me and you aren't even a fan of the sport, it might spark something in you that makes you learn it and enjoy it. And especially if you're American, that'll come really in handy in about 3 years in the World Cup. So if you pick up Football Manager after playing Out of the Park Baseball, if you've made the switch in the past like I have, or if you're making the switch now, let me know. Ask your questions in the comments. I'm happy to help in there. And most of all, happy simming.